Welcome to the MetaView Podcast. Hear these non-fungible conversations. They will yield you great knowledge and perspective. But beware, they might also make your brain go boom. So watch your step, because this rabbit hole goes deep. Good luck and have fun. All right, welcome Malcolm to the MetaView Podcast.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So your name became a bit of a meme inside the metagame community with all the trouble that we had with booking you for the MetaFest. But would you be down to do a brief intro to yourself for the people who don't know you?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different angles on me, and MetaView is a pretty good place to start. Even just like unpacking what I think when I hear that phrase. I've been orienting for many years to the puzzle of how to bring different viewpoints into contact, whether those are different views inside yourself, like different priorities that you have, and how to prioritize between them, how to choose what you really want to do, or whether those are like, different paradigms of like ways of seeing the world. Yeah, and so that has led me to a lot of different things. I've been working on an app that helps people stay focused on what's meaningful to them, which used to be called Accomplice and is now called Intend. You can go to intend.do to check that out. And that's, we can talk a lot more about how that app works. And then in some ways, like that app is a meaningful part of my life, but it's not the sort of the center of my vocation or calling either, which is more around stuff around how do we create collaborative cultures and learn how to really effectively play win-win games with each other, with kind of the basic premise being that if we get good enough at playing win-win games, we don't want to play any games that have losing involved. And I don't mean things like, chess and soccer, but like we don't want to play zero-sum games on the biggest scales of our lives because they don't make as much awesomeness for everybody. And so I see a sense in which everybody wants to play win-win games if they knew how, but because they don't know how, they end up selfishly focused on their own winning at the expense of others. I'm pretty mistake theory about this. I see this as like basically like if people knew how to play better games, they would. So it's mostly a matter of figuring out how to show people how to do that.
Makes sense. Thank you. And now it occurred to me also that so you might be a good fit for another thing that I'm sort of involved with, but not really. Are you familiar with Hansi Freinacht and like metamodernism? And
oh yeah.
Yes. So do you know about the new project that he started called ARC? ARC?
No, I don't know about ARC.
Yeah, so it's an Arch-Disciplinary Research Center. So it's basically about bringing together all the different worldviews and coming up with a meta theory.
What was the first word there?
ARC, Arch-Disciplinary Research Center.
Arch-disciplinary, interesting.
Yes, that sounds like it's right up your alley.
Yeah.
But we can get into that after the call if you're interested. And then, what have you got into starting Accomplice, and what motivated you and how you got started?
Yeah, so there was kind of a few things. Like I wanted to have a business by the time I graduated university so that I didn't have to get a job and I could instead focus on both what was most meaningful to me and what I felt sort of the world most needed without having to convince somebody else that was important or kind of get funding from them. And so that was kind of one thread of motivation that led in. And then as to why I started this business in particular and not some other one, I'd had a really powerful experience the year before of doing some goal setting with this paper workbook where I chose a few goals, and I didn't achieve all of them, but I did manage to record and release an album back in 2012. And that was this powerful experience of like, whoa, I can just decide to do stuff and like make a whole project out of it and make it happen. Like that's pretty profound. And I think a lot of people go through their life as kind of like they realize it's a choose your own adventure book. Some people are 100% on autopilot, but most people sort of realize, okay, this is a choose your own adventure book. And they go, okay, I guess which college do I want to go to? And it's like they pick one, but the options are in a choose your own adventure book are sort of written there already. It's like to go to, the university your dad went to, turn to page 48. And people don't realize like you can actually just write your own story. Like you can just be like, actually what I want is this thing that nobody's ever done before, but it's a mashup of, things people have done before. So that was a really profound experience for me that I wanted to share with other people, like the experience of just deciding to do something and then doing it, making it happen. And that's in some sense like where Intend started as Accomplice. It was very much about goal setting. Like that was kind of the main emphasis. And that's still very much at the center. Like, it looks like a to-do list app, but unlike most to-do list apps where you start by dumping a bunch of things in that you're not ever actually going to do, but you like to pretend to yourself that you're going to do, and they're like a bunch of random little things. With Intend, you start by listing out like, what are my long-term goals? Like, what do I actually care about? Where am I trying to move in the world with my life and get to? And then the things that you choose to work on each day are based on the long-term goal. So it's not a matter of, just wrangling all these little tasks. It's like you're choosing fresh each day. What do I want to do given that I care about this long-term stuff? And so I frame this a lot in terms of intentionality, which I see as a different way of thinking about what people are trying to get out of apps like this compared to something like productivity, which is sort of like, it's sort of just a measure of output, but not like matteringness.
Right, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I love that it starts with like the bigger picture of like what you want to do with your life rather than just list all the things that you need to do in the near future.
Yeah.
It's a lot more motivating as well. And how has that been going so far? So we've been doing it for many years. I know that like at least 5 years, but probably more.
Yeah, almost 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Yeah. And so that's been the main way that I've made my living since then, from the app and from the workshops that we've run a couple times a year the last 6 years or so.
Got it. That's awesome. And how long did it take you to get to that point where you can actually live off of it?
It was about 2 years to get to the point where I could live off it at all, but I was living extremely frugally at that time, and so then I grew it a bit more over the next probably 2 years to the point where I was able to live, comfortably. I'm not wealthy, but or I'm not like rich, but and now I'm in a process of growing it even further, because while it totally has made enough money for me to live, I want to have a family, and I need more money to pay for food for kids and diapers and whatever that's gonna entail, larger home, etc.
But so it's pretty much built by just you, like there's no team.
Yeah, I've had other people helping with different aspects of it at different points, but it's always in some sense been a one-person company, sometimes with somebody else kind of as my main thinking partner and working on some main projects with me. Yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see how that changes over the next like year or two as I scale up the number of customers, because of course software, you don't inherently need more staff to have the business be 10 times as big, which is of course not true of like a store or a restaurant or something. But there may be a need for other people to help out with different parts of things, or it may just be nice to offload some of the work.
Right, that makes sense. And it's been fully bootstrapped, right? You never raised any money for it.
Yeah. I got one or two little like government grants and stuff, but yeah, it's very much not investment based, and that's been really nice because it's let me move at my own pace and not be in any rush to get anywhere, which has been helpful as it's let me pay more attention to my to all the other stuff that I'm interested in around consciousness and culture and that kind of stuff.
Right, your own goals.
Yeah, Exactly. I have a lot.
And, do you use Intend yourself?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's definitely, it's important that like from the very beginning I had customers. Like I had customers before I'd written any code or even come up with a name for the thing, that were just like friends of mine that I said, hey, I want to help you with your goals. Will you, pay me some dollars through PayPal to join my sort of cohort of something I'm going to turn into a business. So it's like, it's helped that I've had customers since the beginning, but I've also definitely been one of the main people that I've been developing the app for. Is just like, what do I want this to have? Like, and a couple of years ago, around the time you and I first started talking, I realized like, Intend is all about freshness rather than staleness, like not having your list go stale. And I realized that while the today page is great for that because, you get to choose afresh each day what you want to work on, it can still end up feeling kind of stale when you get, your mid-afternoon and you thought you'd do a bunch of things today, but then the morning went totally different than you thought, and now like it's not realistic to get to that big project, and then you're like, okay, should I do at least a little bit of the big project, or should I just take care of some of these other things? And you sort of get to the middle of the day, and even your list that you made 6 hours ago is already stale. And so I made the now page, which is literally you just put in, this is what I'm working on now. And then there's a button to say, I did it. There's a button to say, I'm not going to do it right now. There's a button to say, I'm actually not going to do this today at all. And so it's like, I built that in large part for myself. Like I just really wanted that, but now it's available to the other people using the app. So yeah, very much bootstrapped. I actually just hit a 4-year streak of having my what I did that day filled in for every day in those 4 years.
Nice.
Yeah, which is pretty cool. And I think it's worth naming that I don't the way the streaks feature works is designed to be like anti-panic inducing. Like it's you don't have to check in by midnight, otherwise you lose your streak. It's you can actually keep your streak alive by going back and filling in what you did on days that you weren't even online. Like actually some of the very first few days of that, the 4-year streak that I currently have, I was at a week-long retreat where I don't think I had my computer with me, and I wasn't online, but I used my journal entries and stuff to reconstruct like what had I been doing each day, and I put those into the app. So it's kind of encouraging you to not worry about having every day be perfect or anything like that, but instead to have a kind of an ongoing practice of attending to the question of like, what am I doing? How is what I'm doing contributing to my long-term goals or vision or whatever it is that I care about?
That makes sense. Yeah, another app that I'm currently using for like check-ins inside MetaGame has that exact like enforcing rule where like you have to check in by this specific time or that day is like not completed. And I had multiple times like I actually did the thing, but I just didn't report on time, or I didn't finish writing the report or whatever. And then I ended up failing and losing the streak, and even losing money actually, because in this specific app you stake money on your goals. I think it's a cool mechanism, but yeah, the issue is that you have to report like, and sometimes I fail even when I actually do it. I just don't report on time.
Totally. Yeah. And I went and built a stake feature into my app as well. And part of what's interesting about it is like, there's this app BeMinder, which is about, regular recurring making progress on numerical stuff. And the stakes thing that I have is sort of exactly the opposite. It's like, it's specifically for one-off stuff where you really want to commit today. You're like, no, today is the day that this happens. I'm going to put money on it. But I've tried to be really clear with people in the writing that it's like, you are putting money on the line, not just for doing the thing, but for telling us you've done the thing. Like we can't be like fussed about the difference between those. Like you got to show up and tell us that's what you're committing to do. So that sort of thing can be really powerful. You do have to be careful with it, but it is really powerful. I've used it a lot in my life.
So what, any other ways that intent is different from like usual habit tracking or like to-do apps?
Yeah. So, in terms of how it's different from other things that are more in the habit tracking space versus the to-do space, like a lot of stuff in the to-do space is sort of backlog based. And so the main difference there is that intent is not backlog based. Like if you don't do something today, it doesn't go on your list for tomorrow. That would defeat the point of having the list be for today. Instead, it goes on list of things I thought I was going to do yesterday and didn't do. And then if you want, you can grab it for tomorrow, but you don't, like, that's a choice that you make. Like, so the intention has a kind of time boundedness and it doesn't sort of linger around. And that's part of what makes it actually an intention, because the thing is, like, people don't realize this, but like, you have to think, like, ontology matters for this stuff. If you've got an app that lets people put in things with a checkbox next to them, like, what are those things? Are they tasks? What's a task? Are they to-dos? What's a to-do? And in practice, people end up putting in a lot of different types of things that, like, where the different typeness actually matters a lot. So it's like you'll have in a given list a mix of, here's an idea that I had that I sort of don't want to lose track of, I guess. Here's an obligation, like something somebody's expecting of me, where something, bad will happen if I don't do it. Here's something there's different scales of obligation, right? Like there's sort of like, I loosely told somebody I'd do it. And then there's like, I've got to file my taxes. Like you really gotta. There's sort of no opting out, no saying, actually, I decided I didn't want to do this. Sorry about that. So there's different scales of obligations. Then there's something like components of a project where it's like, when I was doing the rebrand from Compos to Intend, I've actually been meaning to write up a case study about this. It's like I had a giant tree of like, here's all the stuff I have to get to. And it was really helpful in the context of having this concrete project to be able to sort of look at the list and be like, okay, what's left? What do I want to tackle today? But, that was the specific sub-project within my business of doing the rebrand. If I just look at a generic list that I have of things that I might want to do towards, making my business better, it's sort of not actually obvious that I'm going to find time to do all of them because there are so many. And, it would take years to actually implement all the features that I've imagined I could build. And by then I'll have more ideas of features to build and, things will have changed. Whereas for a project that's only taking a month or two, it's like, it's actually reasonable to spec out, here's all the things that I have to either do, or maybe, in one or two cases I decide, I actually don't need to do that as part of this project. But there's a sense in which I do need to decide, like, oh, actually, I'm just not going to handle that. I'm going to do it some other way. So those are all different, like, types of things. There's probably a few more. I haven't fully specced out the different types because, again, in Intend, there's basically only one type, which is this is a thing I'm intending to do today. Like that's the only type of thing it lets you enter. So there's not sort of vague ideas of notions of things I might want to do someday. There's not, obligations that somebody gave me that are due in 2 weeks. It's all kind of pretty focused. Yeah, so I mean, that's the main way in which it's different from something like a to-do app. As for how it's different from a habit app, habit apps are largely focused on kind of doing the same thing every day. It's like I want to, every day I want to brush my teeth. Every day I want to do yoga in the morning. Every day I want to, text my mom, like whatever the thing is. And, or every day I want to, make a sales call or something, and in a lot of cases, like habits can be really powerful, but there are a lot of places that you can't get just by putting one foot in front of another. Like you can't just be like, take one step per day where it's sort of like the same type of step, because there's a need to kind of orient to what is it that I'm doing here? What do I actually need to do next? And it's not the same thing every day. If you're running, like I'm sure with your work in running the metagame community, it's like, maybe there's some stuff that you just got to take care of every day, but there's also a lot of stuff that's different, like literally every day. Would you say so?
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, it's like being able to track what that stuff is really important. And a habit tracker app sort of doesn't give you that moment of kind of clarity. Like, you can put into your habit app a habit of, consider what to do today, but like you still got to do that somewhere and you got to somehow track what are those things that you're going to do. So for open-ended projects like businesses, communities, even like learning projects, it's like, okay, today I want to practice this song on the guitar or something. Like you can just have a habit of pick up the guitar for half an hour, but that's going to be pretty like loose and open-ended unless you somehow have a way to orient to like what you're actually doing. And I like to say that like Intend can kind of be the meta place where you orient to your other goal tracking systems as well. Like suppose you have a fitness goal, like you might have a fitness app like Strong Lifts or Runkeeper or something where you're tracking your actual workouts. But if those apps stop working, or if you get an injury and you need to do something other than running for a while, it's like, where do you go to orient to that question? And Intend can kind of be that place.
Right. That makes complete sense. I mean, even with like learning to play a guitar, you don't necessarily want to set half an hour of practice every day, but having more like concrete goals of like learning to play this song, or like, learn to play different songs, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the other powerful features of Intend is that it has a very different kind of weekly review than GTD-based apps have. So GTD-based apps are all about wrangling this giant pile of stuff that you've dumped into them. And if you don't do that, then you end up with an even larger pile of stuff next week, which makes it even more aversive. And so the system can fail pretty quickly as a result of that. And the reviews in Intend, by contrast, are not about that kind of wrangling, but about like looking over what you did the past week or the past month and being like, okay, where have I come? Like what what wins do I have that I can build on here? What things have I been ignoring, and like, are there reasons I've been ignoring them? Like, is there a better way to approach them? But you're sort of already surveying what you've done, and that can be really satisfying and motivating to actually like look at the progress that you made in a week. It's like, wow, I did a lot of different stuff. Like, you get to the end of the week and kind of forget what you actually did earlier in the week, and so to see it again is pretty cool. And so I kind of think of it as a system of fractal reviews. It's like you've got a daily review, a weekly review, monthly, quarterly, and yearly. And in those different reviews, you can kind of see the other reviews. And so you can kind of integrate all these different temporal horizons together.
I like that. Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, mine is just like reviewing. Yeah, I guess it's not much of a review, but more so looking ahead of like, okay, what's next? And yeah, I do have this like, in the same way, like I'm using Notion for both to-dos and habits. So I have like automatically recurring tasks, and it just piles on. And like when I get to like the point where I have to scroll down to see the whole page, it just starts adding up anxiety, and I'm not sure it's so helpful. So I want to talk a bit about the importance of setting goals, or like setting clear goals, because people are often like, okay, I'm going to do this, but they don't like really properly work it out or follow through.
I would say there's a few elements to that, and we go over this in quite a lot of detail in the workshops that we run, because that's another story. Anyway, point is, we've got these workshops. There's some coming up in July, so if this podcast is out before then, we can put a link to the workshops in the show notes. And the idea with the way that I like to think about goals is that it's about getting clear on what you're doing and what you're not doing. And then the what you're not doing part is just as important as the what you're doing part. Like, if you just try to tack a new goal onto your life, that can sometimes work. You suddenly get inspired to learn a new skill, and you're like, oh, I'm going to learn this new skill. And maybe it just happens. But in general, part of, necessarily choosing what to do is choosing what not to do, because no matter how many or how few goals you set, everybody's got 168 hours in a week and has got to spend some of those hours sleeping. And in the goal setting process we use in the workshop, we first focus on a kind of really broad approach, inviting people to make a dream list of like, anywhere from like 30 to over 100 ideas of like things they think they might want to do or be or have or experience. And then having listed all of those out, which might even include some things that are like not even physically possible. Like when I first did this, I wrote down like invent a teleporter, because that was the thing that I wanted to do when I was a kid. And the point is just to kind of express all of those and see them all in the same space. And then having done that, you can sort of go, okay, so given that I could do any of these things, I mean, maybe not the teleporter, but I could focus on any of these things. But given that I also can't do all of these things, it's like, what do I actually want to focus on? And I really found that the process of choosing some things and letting go of others are so intrinsically linked. I tweeted about this the other day, which is like, have you considered that maybe the reason why a bunch of thoughts are coming up and interrupting your meditation session is because you didn't get buy-in from those thoughts to sit quietly and meditate, and they've got stuff that they're trying to take care of, which is overdue. And so naturally they're trying to take advantage of these like spare moments of attention to, figure out how to get themselves done. And it's the same with any activity. If you're finding yourself not focused, it's probably a sign that part of you actually thinks you're supposed to be doing something else right now. And that could be something as simple as eating, or it could be something like, I'm actually conflicted about whether or not I want to grow my business at all, or I'm conflicted about whether this project is a good idea, or whatever the other thing is. There's some sort of inner conflict. And so there's a process on any scale, whether that's, setting a big goal for the next few years, or literally just like, what am I doing in this moment? Like, I thought I was going to write a blog post. I'm on Twitter. What's going on? And it's like, where is this energy that wants to go on Twitter from? Can I invite the energy that sort of is drawing me into Twitter? Can I invite that energy to let go? And part of what makes that an invitation is that like, there's also an option that the energy says, no, I don't want to let go. And then it's like, okay, well, now what do we do? And I have a lot of thoughts on this, but it's a very complex thing. And I've been thinking of making some like actually guided meditations basically around this. I think I have one out there that's about like a sort of intention meditation where you start with just resting for a moment, and then you're kind of like, okay, what do I want to do from all the things that I could do? And then you consider one option, and then you gently kind of ask the rest of yourself, like, may I do this? Like, may I be totally free to do this? May all of my other intentions let go? And you kind of invite them to let go. And if some other part has a really strong bid that's like, no, actually, you can't just write this blog post right now. You've really got to reply to that text that you haven't been replying to for 3 days. And that's going to eat at you if you try to focus on anything else. It's like, okay, well, let me go try to reply to that text. But people get tangled all up because then when they go to the reply to the text, they feel shame and they feel like, I don't want to reply to the text. And all of that is bogging down their ability to do literally anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, a lot of conflicting wants and needs coming from inside, and people aren't taught, or they just don't know how to integrate all of this into like a coherent way forward in their lives. So yeah, you wanna talk a bit about the upcoming goal crafting intensive, which should help people do this.
Yeah. So we've actually been thinking about like maybe even renaming the intensive, because it starts with goals, but it really goes beyond them into a whole space of like, what does it even mean to be a person who cares about stuff and is trying to do stuff? Like really getting at some of the like basic ontological questions there. And yeah, the basic structure of the workshop. So like one thing I'll just say is that like part of why I love it is that it is an online workshop. It is not a course. It's not cohort based. It's not self-paced. I like to think of it as self-based because it's just one 5-hour block. And so there's no like, I got to show up every week, and there's no like, I've got to somehow find time, but I could do it anytime. So I should be doing it all the time, but obviously I don't do it anytime because anytime never comes or whatever. So I really like that. I have a lot of trouble with online courses, but an online workshop can work really, really well. And what we do is we get everybody together and we kind of give them some orientation. And then there's within the 5 hours of the workshop, there's 4 hours of Pomodoros, which is to say 25-minute focused work periods. And during those, people can do, well, pretty much anything they want, to be honest. But the basic structure, the kind of classic version of this is you go through the course content, like we have some modules and frameworks and stuff like that, and you kind of watch videos and then do exercises that help you set your goals and then clarify what those goals are. So it's like, making the goal really specific so that it's really clear. Like some people think you need a numerical metric for this. That can help if you're in an organization where you kind of need to be on the same page about exactly what the things mean. But for a personal goal, you don't need a numerical metric. If it is going to be a goal and not just kind of an ongoing life trajectory, I mean, like trajectories are fine. Following your nose is fine. Like having an intention to just follow your nose around a particular topic is great. And likewise, trying to have a system of habits that sort of keeps you healthy, but you don't have any particular place you're trying to get to, also great. But if you're going to have a goal, then there's kind of like a recognizable state in the future that you're aiming for. And you want to get really, really clear on what will the world look like when I've achieved this? Like I'm going to be looking around my life and what am I going to see? What am I going to experience? What am I going to hear? What am I going to smell or taste? I mean, how am I going to feel? And just getting really clear on what it will look like to have the thing be complete. And then you can kind of just use that felt sense that you have and contrast it with, well, where am I right now? Oh, yeah, I want to look at my bank balance and have it say, that I'm not in debt. Like I want to have no negative numbers when I pull up my bank account. So, okay, that's what achieving this goal will look like, right? And then you can just pull up your bank account balance and look at it and be like, there's currently a large negative number here. And so like, obviously you're going to have to find some strategies for doing that, but maybe the first strategy you try doesn't work, and that's fine. You can continue to just look at the numbers and be like, yes, they need to be different. Now what am I going to try? And sort of continually strategically reorienting to trying stuff. Again, that's a very concrete, numerical metric, but it could also be something like, I feel like I have abundant friendships is like a thing. And then you could get more specific. Okay, are these in-person friends or do online friends count? Or maybe I want a mix of both or whatever. What does it mean to have to have a friend, and you might get sort of specific, like, okay, a friend is someone who I can ask to hang out with without any reason to hang out with them. That's a definition I've sometimes liked for friendship. It's like there's people that you kind of know and you can be like, hey, let's have a call sometime. I've been thinking about this topic. We should talk about it together. And then there's a friend where you can just be like, yo, let's catch up. And what I'm getting at here is like, it's not about the definition of friend, but it's about getting clear on what your definition is of friend, if that's the thing that you're trying to make a goal out of or whatever. Like getting really clear on what that means to you so that you can aim towards it. So we walk people through that. So I've kind of talked about there's goal selection, which is this process of choosing, I'm going to do this, I'm not going to do that. So module 1 is goal setting, which includes like ideation of goals and then goal selection. And then you have module 2, which is planning, which is first of all clarifying what exactly the goal is, and then kind of moving from there into like what are some of those paths or strategies by which I might achieve that goal. And then we talk a bit about execution, like how do you set up systems to kind of make consistent progress. And then finally, there's the reflection module, which is about setting up systems to kind of notice what it is that you are getting stuck on, or noticing things that you're ignoring. Or throughout the workshop, I use a metaphor of climbing a mountain. And I really like physical metaphors for thinking about goals, because people often get very confused. They see goals as a very abstract thing, but it's like, there's a sense in which if you are walking to the store, then arriving at the store is a goal that you have. Like it is very concretely, there is a recognizable desired state in the future that you are acting in order to achieve. And that desired state of the future is you are at the store. And people are very good at handling goals like that most of the time in a way that they sort of fail to translate those goals into much more abstract goals. And that's partially because they feel unclear about how to achieve them, whereas walking to the store, like you usually know how to figure it out. And so within this metaphor of kind of climbing a mountain or going somewhere, even just more abstractly than climbing a mountain, it's like you may not know exactly what it'll look like when you arrive because you've never been to the top of this mountain, but you know it'll be the top of the mountain because there won't be any further up to go. Or you may not know exactly what restaurant you're going to get food at, but you know what it'll feel like to be fed when if you're going out to find food in a city or something. And so that's the recognizable desired state in the future, which is the goal. And then the planning process is kind of orienting to, okay, what path am I intending to take there? I could try this path, I could try that path. Execution is walking the path. Like it's just actually taking the steps that move you closer. And then reflection is like noticing either if you've gone off the path that you intended to be on, or noticing if the path that you're on doesn't seem to actually be taking you where you want, and then kind of reorienting and coming up with a new path. Or another thing that happens is sometimes when you walk the path a bit, you realize you actually didn't want the thing that you wanted, or it's not actually possible or whatever. You get partway to the store and then suddenly you're like, wait a minute, isn't this store closed on Sundays? And you check and it's like, yeah, the store's closed on Sundays. And then at that point you have to decide, okay, am I going to a different store or am I just going home? That's actually not a good example because I'm trying to point at something more about like, there are times when the only way to find out that you don't actually want a particular goal is to head partway down that path. Maybe you're like, oh, I want to date this person. And so, you date them, and a few months into that, you actually realize, wait, this isn't a good fit at all, actually. But it's like, you couldn't have known that without intending to make it work and finding out what happens when you try. So I see all of this as very fluid. Goals are a tool to organize your attention towards things that you care about. But if you get fixated on the goal and as like an objective thing and lose touch with what you actually care about, then you kind of lost the plot. You lost the point. So we try to guide people into kind of that way of thinking in our workshops. And we do a pretty good job of that, both for people who are new to the realm of goal setting and for people who've like done a lot of, personal development, life hacking type stuff before. And part of how we do that is we have, in addition to this course content, which has a bunch of exercises, we also have live coaching. So if people do get stuck or if they want an extra challenge, like we can work one-on-one, and not actually one-on-one, we can work, 5 to 10 on one, because each person has their own channel with all of the coaches that we have at the workshop in that channel, so they can ask questions and get a bunch of different perspectives chiming in, which is a very powerful format that honestly I would love to see more workshops with that format.
I love it. Yeah, sounds like you thought through every detail. Like it's obvious you've been working on this for 10 years.
Yeah, I have a very thorough approach with my attention when I'm applying it to something. There are some people who are thorough in a manner of like researching things thoroughly, and that has never been my style, but I'm voraciously curious in general, and so then once I've been like exploring something long enough, I'm pretty good at sort of distilling what I have learned into a system that makes sense and kind of is whole and complete and hasn't like overlooked a major detail, I would say.
It's a great skill. And then, zooming out a bit and thinking about the meta protocol, and there was that post that you wrote called Collaborative Self-Energizing Meta Team Vision. And you want to get into that stuff. So like goals in multiplayer mode.
Right, goals in multiplayer mode. So, I mean, the thing I just said is actually a pretty good segue, I think, because part of what I was just talking about was about my own strengths and weaknesses. And, if I know that I'm not very motivated to sort of like do research on stuff as like a deliberate, methodical thing, but I have friends who are, it's like I can kind of piggyback on their research and I can focus on what I'm better at, which is maybe synthesis or something like that. And so when I think of self-energizing motivation, there's something where people often think they have to get themselves to do things. This is, from my perspective, completely backwards. The moment you think you might want to get yourself to do something, you already have motivation to do it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be interested in the project of trying to get yourself to do it, right? So instead, the thing to focus on from my perspective, and this is sort of what I was saying earlier, is like, how do I allow myself to do it? Because if I have motivation to do it and I'm not doing it, then there must be some other part that has motivation to not do it or to do something else or to rest or whatever it is. And so the question to ask is like, what part of me is blocking this, and how can it release my energy to do this? But there are some things that the mere act of becoming aware of them as possibilities generates immediate motivation that does not need to, there's no allowing required, and there's no sense of like, oh, this was a bit tiring, now I need to kind of recoup. When I think of motivation, I sometimes like the example of, if you suppose it's a lonely summer night or whatever, and you get a text from someone you have a crush on that's like, hey, want to come over? It's like, you don't need to put that on your to-do list. You're very motivated to just do it, right? Like it's immediate. The motivation is there. It's visceral. It would actually take energy to not do it. Now, obviously, in a caloric sense, it takes more energy to, run over to somebody's house than it does to just sit on your couch. But caloric energy is sort of not the limiting factor for people. The limiting factor is like something like clarity and like unity of will or whatever. And so when an opportunity really arises to do something that you love doing, and all of the frictions are removed, it's like the motivation takes care of itself. And so part of the vision with the self-energizing meta team is, as people get clearer and clearer on what they really love to do, they can find their way into collaborations where, both people are having this motivation where it's actually easier to do the thing than not to do it once the opportunity has arisen. And this is how a good company works in some sense, actually. Like, people are motivated by wanting to do good work, and motivated by wanting mastery, and motivated by wanting an experience of satisfying like collective flow and teamwork and so on. And so in a good company, you've got everybody taking care of work that they are particularly well suited to doing and that they feel particularly energized and motivated to do. And then they're unblocking each other. And so part of the thinking with the self-energizing meta team is like, can we have experiences of doing that for each other without having so many sort of levels of formal organization around it like a company? Because it might be the case that actually the skills that I really love deploying, a typical team might need like 5 hours of that skill like once a month. And so it's like, if I try to get a full-time job anywhere, there is no full-time job where I can be deploying that skill all the time, because a given team just doesn't need it that often. And for me, an example of this might be like, I can sometimes have really deep insights into how things are designed and how they could be better designed in terms of interfaces and so on. But it's like, once you've had those insights about a given thing, there's a bunch of work to do to actually sort of implement that into the solution. And so if I tried to be on just one team doing that, it wouldn't work very well. But if I can be contributing that wisdom and expertise to many teams in parallel, then I get to do more of what I feel really jazzed about. And that then inspires me to want to do more of it because there's less of a slog. Yeah, so that's kind of my vision with the self-energizing meta team. I'm curious how that dovetails with the stuff you've been playing with around metagame and so on, because I'm guessing there's overlap there.
Yeah, so one thing that I've been thinking about recently and what you kind of touched upon here is that like people need to have clearly set goals, and other people need to know what these goals are. And that's like how you get people actually motivated and energized, because like you invite them to work on things that they want to work on, and they're like already motivated, because like you don't have to incentivize them with money or whatever, like some extrinsic rewards, because like, yeah, they're interested in these things, like in getting more mastery in this or whatever.
Right. The money becomes not an incentive, but an enabling factor. It's like, I already want to do this. It's just, I can't do it if I need to work another job. So if you can give me money so that I don't have to do another job, then I would love to do this, right? And that's a very different kind of incentivizing. It's like, I just want to do it already. You're just unblocking me, rather than the idea that you are trying to get me to do something that I sort of otherwise, I wouldn't really want to.
Right. Yeah, like the people most often think about, adding some incentives, like adding more money. So they're earning money, but we're going to have bonuses for this sort of stuff. And that's like how I used to think about it as well. But it doesn't seem to necessarily be the case that more money gets people more motivated at all.
Totally. And performance-based bonuses, like paying people more on the basis of better performance, can actually sap motivation depending on what the thing is, because it messes with intrinsic motivation, and it can make people anxious about how they're performing and makes it harder to get into flow states with it. So there's a lot of tricky stuff there. And I think, like, as a society, more and more people are waking up to the realization that not only punishments, but also rewards are actually not a very good way to organize things, because they inevitably lead to good hearting, right? Like if you're doing something for a reward, then the actual incentive is not to do the thing. The actual incentive is to look like you're doing the thing, which is a different thing, right? And less satisfying. And, Robert Keegan has written about this in his book, An Everyone Culture, about deliberately developmental organizations. There's a great excerpt, like from the very start of it. The excerpt is actually published online, link, and I can send it to you. But it's basically saying, like, in every organization, everybody is doing a second job that they are not getting paid for, which is hiding. And that shows up in part because of, it's not just the financial incentives, it's also the social incentives of like what happens if you actually speak your mind and so on. But yeah, there's something about flipping the way that we're doing things so that the self-energizing motivation comes first. And then I think, like, there's another thing where it's like, look, I'm totally motivated by money. I've totally been able to recognize that. It's like I'm very excited, selling tickets to these workshops and seeing like, oh yeah, more people are signing up. I'm gonna have more money. Like, there's something satisfying about that. But it's part of why that is that the more money I have, the more freedom I have to do what I want, and it's like I feel that connection really clearly. So it's like, likewise, I think that, like, in my work running my business, there are totally things that arise that someone has to do in that business that if I had the ability to just delegate 10 hours of stuff a week with zero effort, which, people often underestimate the cost of delegation. We can get into that in a moment. But like, if I just had the ability to just have someone else take care of it with no extra work on my part, there are some things that show up that I would love to do that with, but currently I just kind of suck it up and do it. But part of why I'm motivated to do it is because I love the overall arrangement of having my own business and being able to do all of this other stuff that I really love doing. And so it is clearly worth it to me to take care of these things that I don't necessarily find intrinsically enjoyable so much. because I know that they're what allow me to do the stuff I do find really enjoyable. And so it's like, similarly, people will also do things for money because the money allows them to do other things that they want to do. And so it's like, that's like not as directly coupled, but it is still relatively, there's a way in which it's still coupled to the self-energizingness. It's just sort of indirect.
Great. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Like, it's the thing itself is not very enjoyable, but it brings you closer to what is enjoyable, or like what your goal is.
Yeah, and that can be sort of directly via money, or it can be via like, in order to play a gig as a musician, it's like I gotta send out some messages to people who are hosting gigs, right? And it's like, do I like sending out messages to people? No, I want to just be on stage playing gigs. But if I want to be playing gigs at at my current level of not having a stage manager or whatever, it's like I gotta do the marketing, the reach out, that kind of stuff. And so I guess the part of the other thing here, which I mentioned around delegation, is basically like part of what I think will be required to make an actual meta team work, by which I mean a bunch of sort of fluidly flowing people who are working on different projects and like very fluidly collaborating with each other. Part of what seems to me necessary to making that work is that people need to be remarkably good at both delegating and receiving delegated things and managing each other's attention smoothly, like giving enough detail but not too much detail so that the other person has the autonomy to do it how they feel and hand it back to the person who kind of assigned it, and have it be like, yes, this is what I wanted, and not like, oh man, you just wasted a bunch of time because this is not what I wanted. Or sort of the person delegating wasting a bunch of time up front, specifying a bunch of things that either could have gone without saying, or the fact that they all need to be said is a sign they're actually not working with the right person. And so like being able to fluidly figure all that out feels like one of the kind of meta skills needed to navigate all of this.
That's a great point. I've actually had the issue with this myself. Like, first, like with giving not clear enough instructions, and then the person either not understanding what they're supposed to do, or like doing something completely wrong.
Yeah.
Or like in other cases, like giving, as you said, like too much information, and then people say, well, like, look, this dude is just like micromanaging this person. It's a thin line.
It's a thin line, but it's a fuzzy line, because there is no like, here's the right answer. There is just always a contextual puzzle. And once you've worked with somebody on one type of project a dozen times, you don't need to give them as much instruction because you already know that. And so it's a constantly evolving process too.
Yeah, it also depends, like person to person. Like one person might need a lot more context, even if they're completely involved. Another person might need less context, even though like it's the first time you're collaborating with them.
Right. Yeah, totally.
So it's definitely tricky. What other things would you say are important for like having these sort of functional, self-energizing teams?
In order to be free to do something, you need to be free to not do it. And people don't really realize the extent to which you can experience that freedom even in a situation that is very constrained. Like, oh, I have to do this because my boss assigned it. It's like, well, what if you didn't do it? Well, then maybe I'd get fired. Well, what if you got fired? Well, then I wouldn't have a job. It's like, well, what if you didn't have a job? And it's like, well, then I'd be on the street. And it's like, well, what if you were on the street? It's like you can just actually hold these possibilities as real possibilities. And if that's the actual alternative, then like, now it's not the case that I have to do this. It's actually the case that I want to do this. If my options are do this assignment or be homeless, do this project or be homeless, but those are actually both real options, as opposed to sort of I have to do this so that I'm not homeless. It's like, if I'm like, okay, do I want to do this assignment and have a job and have money and have a home and whatever, or do I want to be homeless? It's like, let's see. Well, it's a pretty easy choice, actually.
Right.
Like, but it becomes an actual choice when you can consider the alternative, rather than seeing the alternative as just like unthinkably bad.
Right. And it might not even be bad. It might be just, okay, so if I lose a job, maybe I'll find this better job that I'm also interested in.
Right. That's the thing. It usually doesn't even go so extremely bad, right? Like, it's like, I tell my boss I don't want to do this assignment, and the boss goes, oh, cool, we'll give it to Bob. What do you want to work on, right? Like, maybe it's literally that. Like, it's not, you don't even lose the job, right? Like,
yeah, I guess it all comes down to like asking the right questions and working through that rather than just like trying to push ahead without thinking too deeply.
Exactly, yeah. And there's a thing here where it's like the have to mindset is from my perspective very connected with autopilot. It's like there's a sort of unquestionedness of I just have to do this. And if you're on such an autopilot, there can often be resistance from all of the parts of you that know that actually you don't have to, or it is a bad idea, or there's some sort of issue with it. So being able to experience that freedom for yourself is sort of the basis of having, any kind of sanity and being able to actually kind of steer or, yeah, as I said, to kind of make conscious choices. Or I don't know. I feel like I've just basically already said the thing. It's like you need to be free to say no to something in order to be free to say yes to it.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah. So anything else you think is important to think about or care about in terms of having functional self-energizing teams?
I mean, there's a fun invitation that might be cool for your metagame crew, which is basically like, think of a thing that you would kind of love to do, but part of why you're not doing it is that there's some element of the project that you really don't want to do. And then try to name both of those really clearly. Okay, I really want to make this project, but I don't want to do any of the graphic design for it. It's like maybe somebody else would love to do the graphic design. And how can you find somebody else who would love to do the part of the project that you would not love to do? That's how we kind of find those win-wins in the self-energizing space, is by recognizing, oh, I'd love to do this and I would not love to handle this part, and then trying to find somebody else who would love to handle that part. So you're not trying to pawn it off on, you're not trying to get somebody else to do your dirty work. You're trying to get someone else who, if they heard about this opportunity, they'd be like, oh, I would love to do that. And I would not love to do the stuff you want to do. And so that's where the win-win comes from. So that could be a fun experiment for people to do if you're sharing this into your group or whatever. Or, if you're not part of Peth's community and you're just listening to this podcast, but you're in some other group of people, whether it's a DM group or whatever else, try to think of a little project that you might love to do where somebody else could handle some other aspect of it, and see if there's anybody in your community or anybody in your Twitter space who would like to kind of take on that other role.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, even if you think it's absolutely the worst job that you can have, like, chances are that somebody else would like it. Like, for me, it's fundraising. Like, I fucking hate fundraising, like, or pitching, sales, anything related to that. Just like not my kind of role. And then for some reason, I also thought that, like, okay, so probably everybody hates that. But then I also met people who are like, oh yeah, I love doing sales. Like, I just get out there, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, so yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll find someone who's like, well, I don't love doing that, but I'm really excited about the idea of learning how to do it. So it's like, if you're in a situation where there's enough sort of slack that someone can take on a role that they're actually pretty new to and kind of learn on the job. Now, that's obviously not true of every situation, but if you are in a situation like that, then that can be another opportunity. Whereas it's like, if you're like, I don't really care about developing that skill, then it's going to be a lot harder for you to get motivated into doing it. And part of why you don't care about developing the skill is you don't want to do it, right? Like, you don't want to be in that role. So why would you want to get better at that role? Yeah. So I feel like that's a pretty good little invitation to leave off on, is to, try to think of a little project and see if there's somebody else who might be down to do the other half of it. And I had a lot of fun even just writing up tiny job descriptions at one point of like roles that people could play adjacent to me that wouldn't, I wouldn't be hiring them full time, but it'd just be like some other half of some project I want to do, just writing up little job descriptions for those.
Do you have any closing thoughts? I guess this was kind of it, but just in case you have anything else.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's a pretty good note to end on. So yeah, thanks for having me on. And
yeah, it finally happened, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was great. And yeah, before you go, so when is the workshop? We will definitely get this out sooner and promote the workshop.
Great. Sounds good. Yeah, and if people want to find me online, I'm on Twitter at Malcolm_Ocean. You will need to know that Malcolm has a silent L in it before the final M if you want to try to type that out just from what I'm saying. But we'll have lots of links in the show notes to stuff like that. We'll link to my pieces of writing about the Meta Protocol and about the self-energizing Meta team, and we'll also link to stuff about the Intend app and the workshop and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, and so the workshop, do people need to apply for the workshop, or they can just show up?
You need to get a ticket. The workshop is pay what you want in terms of the pricing, but we do have people buy a ticket to reserve a seat, so that we know that people are serious about it. And and then there's a bit of like advanced preparation stuff that you can do before the thing, but you do not have to do that. You can totally show up without having done it, and you can still have an awesome time. It just helps because the dreaming part benefits from taking a couple days and kind of sleeping on it a bit, which you can't do in the middle of the workshop.
Right, makes sense. And what's the date?
Oh, it's there's 2 sessions of the workshop, and they are on July 15th and 16th, and they're at different times of day. So depending on which, like if you're in North America or South America or whatever, you could probably go to either of them. Europeans are going to want the one that's on July 16th, and if you're in Australia, you are going to want the one that for me is on July 15th, but for you will also be on July 16th.
All right, perfect. So yeah, we'll include all the links in the show notes. Thank you all for listening, and go to the workshop. Sounds awesome, and I will probably go myself.
Great. Yeah, look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you again for coming on, and see you around.